and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game and would like to remind you that the Premier League is very much a marathon and not a sprint. I am Kevin Day, he's Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire, and unfortunately, Kieran, I don't think we're going to be very good at the marathon either. Although we lost 4-0 at Chelsea last season and 3-0 yesterday, so by my maths, that's a 25% improvement, is that right?
That's very good. You've been following the numbers in the beautiful game, Kevin, clearly.
Yeah, clearly. Osmosis is working wonders on my arithmetic. And I'm on about to mention that you won yesterday. Well done. Cracking. Well done. Everyone's
Thank
really
you.
pleased.
It was good to be back. And also just, some of that terrace nonsense that we get. So when a small but noticeable section of the Burnley fan base decided to boo the players taking the knee, we responded by singing Marcus Rashford, He's Feeding Your Kids, to the Burnley fans. That's what we love about the game.
Oscar, I've missed this level of banter. It's only funny at a football ground. If you did that in a pub, people would just look at you bizarrely, wouldn't they?
Yes.
It's questions day, Kieran, but the questions are sulking somewhat because they have to share today, like good little questions, because coming up we'll be hearing from cryptocurrency expert Gavin Brown about fan tokens, and we have a couple of news stories. And before that even, we have me saying to you, what are fan tokens? As we've been having a lot of questions. Leeds are just the latest club to join in with this science fiction money that not all of us understand. What are they, Kieran? What's happened to cash? Why can't I just give somebody a fiver for a pie?
Well, the thing is, Kevin, if you give somebody $5 for a pie, you get the pie straight away. The thing about these fan tokens is you give the money to the club up front and you get your pie over the course of the next 12 months. And if you don't spend your money, you don't get your pie. It's a bit like if I don't know if you've ever been to Disneyland, where you can exchange your dollars for Mickey Mouse dollars, literally Mickey Mouse dollars. And they're worth exactly the same as a regular dollar, but if at the end of the day you've not spent all of them, you can't exchange them back for real currency.
That's cleared that up, Kieran. Frankly, it's hard enough exchanging cash for pies at Selhurst Park without introducing money that doesn't exist. Let's do these first news stories, Kieran. The first one's a big one. The second one I want to talk about, but I don't want to be too self-indulgent because it's about potentially the greatest football club in the league, just not quite at the moment. You told us last week, Kieran, why Lionel Messi had to leave Barcelona, the complicated set of financial rules that made that happen. But a lot of people are wondering why PSG, wealthy as they are able to afford to bring him in.
Well, as we've discussed on a few occasions, when a club is looking to recruit a player, they look at the total cost over the life of the contract. And that total cost is the transfer fee and the wages. Now, from PSG's perspective, they are getting Lionel Messi on a free transfer, whereas a year ago, he had a buyout clause, which was, I think, something like 700 million euros. So, from their point of view, they're getting a bargain. I guess what people are querying is whether or not that they can pay his wages, which are substantial, but still substantially also lower than those of Neymar. They can pay those wages, as well as they've recruited Wijnaldum, Ramos, Hakimi, Pereira. And they've spent a wee bit in the transfer market, but most of those have been free transfers and stay within financial fair play. And this is sort of the sniping that's been made. What they say is that a combination of new commercial deals or enhanced commercial deals, because let's face it, if you've got a choice of your product alongside Angel Di Maria or Leo Messi, everybody wants Messi. So they can charge extra to their commercial partners. They can also charge more money for hospitality boxes when matches are taking place at Parc des Princes. And yes, they will make some money on merchandise, but far less. I think Piers Morgan was claiming that the shirt sales would cover his wages, and unfortunately, I don't think Piers is particularly well informed in relation to that. But so they've got extra money coming in. They probably do need to shift a couple of players off the wage bill and get some money from transfer revenue as well. But they've still got a fortnight to do that as far as the transfer market is concerned.
Yeah, I was hoping you'd talk about corporate hospitality because I was hoping you'd talk about the prawn sandwich brigade, because I Google translated what prawn sandwich brigade is in French, but it doesn't sound quite so good when it's not when I'm not extemporising. When I've told you that I looked it up in the hope that you would say prawn sandwich brigade, just in case it's la brigade sandwich au crevette. There you go.
That sounds quite enticing, though, doesn't it?
It actually, a sandwich au crevette does sound better than a prawn sandwich, although I'd pronounce it cravate then, and a cravate sandwich is not very good.
Though most things, surely, in French sound far more seductive than they do in English.
It depends if it's a South London accent, basically. Bonjour, love, doesn't sound that brilliant, does it? Well, love, bonjour. We had several tweets, Kieran, suggesting that this perhaps could rejuvenate the French TV deal. Is that possible?
Possible, yes. I believe that Amazon Prime have now signed up with Ligue 1 or to
see, not everything sounds better in French when we say it. I told you.
So I think some form of additional revenues will come in. I don't think that they will be sizable, though, and the reason for that is that the TV deals for the forthcoming season, some of them are some of the deals that have been signed by the French football authorities last 2 or 3 years anyway. So you can't increase or decrease those. So we're in the middle of those. And the ones for this season, I think the broadcasters have probably extracted maximum from the French football people, because they know that French football was in a pretty desperate place only a few months ago.
All I'm saying, Kieran, is if a beautiful young person was offered the choice of David Ginola quoting Baudelaire and me or you quoting Baudelaire, I'm pretty certain they would go for David Ginola. It was somebody else I once inadvertently infuriated.
Oh, really?
Yes. We were on a TV show together, and he just opened his first vineyard, and he was specialising in rosé wine, which it turns out is a very technical process. So he didn't particularly appreciate it when I suggested that it must be quite difficult getting the right amount of red and white in the vat.
I can assure you that the Baroness would listen to every word that he said and just nod away.
Well, that's pretty much. I tried to get angry with him, Kieran, when he was getting, but I couldn't get angry with that voice. Simple as that. I told him that, but he was still gesticulating, to be perfectly honest. Our next story, Kieran, which is the one I don't want to be too self-indulgent about, but I am slightly concerned, is that US businessman John Textor has invested a lot of money into Crystal Palace this week. And my concern is that when we mentioned him a while back as a potential buyer for the club, you were a bit dubious because you didn't think he was wealthy enough to buy the whole club, and there were some issues with his financial background in the States. Should Palace fans be worried about this?
I don't think they should be worried. I mean, certainly John Textor has had ups and downs in terms of his business activities historically, but then many other people have had successes and failure. You've only got to look at Apple. That was a company which almost went bust, and now it's worth around about $2.4 trillion. So companies can come back from the brink. So in terms of John Textor, we've seen the announcement from Palace, and I was just left wanting more information. I understand that he's put in £87.5 million. Now, is that money going to the club, or is it going to existing shareholders? That's not quite clear. Nothing's appeared at Companies House, although historically Palace have never been the quickest to update their records there. How do all of the existing owners feel about this? Because if he's buying for £87.5 million, I estimate Palace to be worth somewhere between 200 and 220 million. So it looks as if he's buying somewhere between 40 to 45%, which means that some of the other shareholders, their investment has been diluted. So where does it leave them? So yeah, those questions are still outstanding, and I think it would be useful if Palace just came out and settled the uncertainty there. But it does look as if one of the first things that's happened is that he's in charge of a mixed reality company called Facebank. Now, I think mixed reality it's a bit like beer goggles. What you see is not necessarily what you get. Who have become Palace's sleeve sponsor, speaking to some other people involved in Premier League sleeve sponsorship. That's likely to be a 7-figure deal. Is that part of his investment? Is that independent of his investment in Palace? These are the things which are sort of just a bit muffled at present, and I think we could probably all benefit from a wee bit of clarity.
Time was, Kieran, many years ago when my face was my bank. So it was the face bank. That was the moneymaker. The local press, certainly in London, are calling him a co-owner and saying that the money will be used on infrastructure, so presumably going towards the new stand, the fabled new stand. Does an investment of this amount of money automatically make him a co-owner, or is there a difference between an investor and an owner?
Well, it depends on how the money is given to the recipient. It could be in the form of a loan, or it could be in the form of a share ownership. If it's shares, if it's equity, then he is certainly a co-owner, given the extent of the investment. Which, as I say, I think we're probably talking around about 49%. The fact that he's not in control, and that appeared to come through from the press release, suggests that it's below 51%, which is normally quite a big threshold in terms of the business. Where does this leave Steve Parish? Presumably Steve's still going to be the chief executive. There's just a lot of uncertainty, but you can certainly become a co-owner. I own shares in one or two football clubs who are traded on stock markets purely because it allows me to get access to information on them a wee bit earlier on occasion. So that, in theory, I'm a co-owner, but in practice, me owning 10 shares in a particular club doesn't tend to move the dial very much, whereas his investment is significant.
John Textor originally made his money in holograms, 7 of whom seem to be on the pitch at Stamford Bridge yesterday. So they're obviously very good.
Harsh.
Let's move on to questions, Kieran, because I know people from the club listen to this pod. I might turn my phone off in the morning. Our first question comes from Stephen Hussey. It probably isn't related to my old friend Bernadette Hussey. But Stephen says, how far down the football pyramid do boot deals extend? For example, when I see yet another promising teenage product from the academy of my beloved Exeter City, and that's City, Kieran, step on the pitch. Are they doing so in sponsored boots, or are these boots purchased by their mum and dad?
I contacted our very good friend and agent Jonathan Booker with regard to this, because he has he's represented players across all divisions, and he said in his experience that the sponsorship deals coming from the major manufacturers, the likes of Nike, Adidas, and Puma, would normally be for players in the Premier League and the Championship. But what sometimes happens is that the agent effectively becomes the boot sponsor, i.e. the player says, I will sign for you if you guarantee me 6 pairs of boots a season. Now, whether the agent goes out and buys them, or sometimes what you will find is that an agent might represent 4 or 5 players at an individual club. He will then go to the manufacturer and either A, try to cut a deal, or B, say, one of these players is currently being watched by Chelsea or Manchester United. If you give him a contract, will you give free boots to the other lads and you just pay the one of them? So there's lots of complexity here, but it is mainly Premier League and Championship. Some of the smaller boot manufacturers, the less well-known brands, are willing to sponsor players with boots in the lower leagues, but the players themselves are normally quite keen on having the big name brands because they see them being worn in the Premier League. We also contacted a manager of a club in one of the lower leagues, and he said this is quite common. And in fact, that he said he was absolutely amazed that players were that naive that they would choose to go to agent A instead of agent B simply on the back of half a dozen sets of boots a season. Surely you should be looking at the much broader issue of the representation from the agent, but people can be bought with baubles. That's why we see those adverts on daytime TV. Sign up for a life of a life of an insurance product or a financial product for the next 10 or 25 years, and we'll send you a £25 Amazon voucher as a signing on, and people fall for it.
Yeah, I like the advert where you can get cremated on a beach and they offer you a pen for signing up. You kind of think, well, how long are you expecting this deal to last for? It's very interesting. I've been at Premier League training grounds on a Monday morning when the week's delivery of new boots arrives for the players. And it's backing up a forklift truck with hundreds of boots that just get thrown at players. They pick a couple of boots to wear that week. And then God knows where the rest go. It's an interesting one. I might ask my friend Selzy, who's a goalkeeping glove manufacturer, about this to see whether it's a similar deal for him. Because I know he deals from the Premier League downwards, but it will have to be an email interview because Palace fans will know that Selzy can talk a lot. And Selzy's from South London, and he'll call you babe, and he will undoubtedly know Uncle Terry or somebody that nicked him. So, but that's an interesting one, isn't it, Howard? That idea that an agent might be able to entice somebody with boots. Our next question comes from Ed Layton. And Ed says, my 2021 New Year's resolution was to win a lottery jackpot. Nothing tells you, Kieran, that we have a backlog of questions more than answering a New Year's one in August. Thank God it was 2021. Ed says he's had no luck so far winning that lottery, but there's plenty of time left this year. Not anymore, Ed. You've got far fewer months left than you had when you asked this question. But Ed says, how much would I need to win to buy and run a football club from the Premier League down to, say, Conference North? Lottery winners, for example, bought Newport County and Partick Thistle, so I thought I would get some free consultancy advice from you before my big windfall. Now, Ed, I have to say, I'm not picking on you here, Ed, because other people are trying to do it. Can we just have some questions rather than trying to get free advice out of Kieran from this? They said, Kieran's a professional. He charges by the hour. Eye-watering. It's not Guy Kilty sums of money, but Kieran charges by the hour. You can't even collar Kieran. With me, you can collar me in a pub and you'll get me cheap. Kieran doesn't drink, so stop trying to sneak questions in. You rascals. But it's an interesting point. I would love to know how much it would take me to buy Palace and just to get the claret and blue kit back, and then I'd sell it again. But what sort of figures are we looking at here, Kieran?
Well, in terms of, there's two issues. There's A, the purchase price of a club, and then there's B, is the underwriting, the running losses. So you can buy a football club for £1. Steve Dale bought Bury Football Club for £1, but it had ongoing financial commitments, of course, which Steve Dale, being a wrong 'un, didn't commit himself to paying any, and I think we can say that without fear of any retribution from Mr. Dale, given what happened to Bury Football Club subsequently. So if the club is losing substantial sums of money, you can buy it for nothing or next to nothing. If the club is run reasonably well, so here, perhaps we're looking at a club such as Rochdale, and Rochdale is currently subject to an offer which appears to value the club at around about £5 million. But that's a very hostile, ongoing takeover, and I think we will make efforts to get somebody from the Rochdale Trust onto the show shortly to explain their position. But I went and did my sums, and then I think Derby are presently for sale at 50 million. I think if you went to Uncle Mel, he'd probably take your hand off for that. We've already said Palace, I reckon, somewhere in the region of 200 to 220. And then if you are looking at Liverpool or Chelsea, I think you can add a zero to that. They're somewhere in the 2 to 2.5 billion. So that those are the broad sums involved. But it's the losses which are my concern. So if you were running a club in League Two, you'd have to be able to be in a position to write out, on average, a cheque for £13,000 a week to keep the club afloat. If you go as far as League One, that 13,000 more than doubles to £30,000 a week. And then if you go up to the Championship, your lottery winnings aren't going to last you very long. The average there, £356,000 per week, after taking into account player sales and parachute payments and everything else that they mysteriously managed to generate from selling the stadium to themselves and the strange taxi deals and all the nonsense. But they're still losing a huge six-figure sum per week, and that's clearly an issue which is it's been long term. So I'd say to Ed, it would have to be a Euro Millions mega rollover before I'd give serious consideration to buying a football club. But personally, I'd just go and sponsor the third kit and change it to the colour that you wanted, and that would be a lot cheaper.
You'd go to Moscow. That's what you do, Kieran. We all know that. That figure, that's a huge, from League One to Championship, that's a huge leap in weekly payout, isn't it?
It is. I mean, and also I think we need to, I'm saying that this is sort of the average. We have seen clubs come up to the Championship from League One, the likes of Rochdale, which have always been really well run, the likes of Luton as well, who are running on a much closer to break-even model than that. At the same time, why are those losses so big? It's because people's eyes are bigger than their face, and they see the riches of the Premier League, and they, I've said this before, they effectively twist on 19. They think that by spending more money on player recruitment, player wages, that will give them that just additional nudge that's required to get to the Premier League, where they'll probably make a profit for the first year and then start to make losses.
Yeah, this is going to sound rather hypocritical after me telling Ed off for asking for free advice, but if any of our silver-tongued friends are listening to this and they could give us, for nothing, a legal definition of a wrong-un, that would be great. That would save Guy a lot of heartache every week when we call somebody a wrong-un. We have the inevitable email exchange when he says, "Can you stop calling people wrong-uns?" Well, they are wrong-uns. Why can't we legally call them? Legally, they have to prove they're not wrong-uns, but Guy reckons that's not the case. But maybe if somebody could tell us that, that'd be lovely. Now, next question comes from Ian McLaughlin, which was, God rest my mother's maiden name. It's not likely that we're related, but Kieran, you will know more than anybody that in any large Irish family, there's always a branch that you don't find out about until somebody dies and makes a deathbed confession, and then you think, that's where the money went. All right, okay. So in the unlikely event that you are related, hello, cousin Ian. But Ian McLaughlin's question is about Huddersfield and their sponsorship deal, which still, even now, that Paddy Power stunt that they pulled off resonates with our listeners. Because Ian says after the Paddy Power deal, Huddersfield went down a new route by having a different sponsor for each home game and a charity on their shirt for away games. Is this more commercially rewarding than a conventional sponsorship, or are they simply making the best of not being able to attract a single larger sponsor?
I think it's a gamble. It's a gamble that could turn into a positive. So if Huddersfield Town, for example, had a very good FA Cup run and they ended up hosting Manchester United, Liverpool, Chelsea, etc., then I think they could make additional funds from it. Equally, if you are the commercial department and they've got Reading on a Tuesday night, who's going to be willing to pay a large sum of money for the privilege of sponsoring the shirts for that match? So what you get with a single sponsor is you get certainty, and certainty means that you can budget with a little bit more degree of confidence. if you're doing it on a match by match basis, and that means that at the start of the season, the chances are you've got potentially say 10 to 15 free slots for later in the season. You will have a figure in mind which you might be able to generate, but it could be that circumstances dictate. We've had COVID. It could be that Huddersfield are having a poor season. That actually there's relatively little interest. So I think it will be a challenge. But you do have the benefit of potential tiered prices when you've got some big local clubs, especially coming to Huddersfield. What intrigues me is the potential impact on merchandise sales. Would fans be more or less inclined to buy the home shirt if they say, well, effectively, if we buy it with the first sponsor of the season, it's out of date in a fortnight. Whereas we've now got into this psyche, and this is something I think really has sort of snuck under the radar. The clubs are changing at least 2 kits and quite often 3 now every season. It wasn't that long ago that kits lasted 2 seasons, which I thought was reasonable. But Huddersfield's effectively could last a fortnight unless you're getting the away kit, which presumably, and if it's connected to a charity, well, my hat is doffed in Huddersfield's direction.
I found it interesting. We're recording this on Sunday night. I found it interesting watching the Newcastle West Ham game, just how many Newcastle fans had the new kit on, which is, again, it's like Palace. There's only so many things you can do with stripes. But despite their beef with Mike Ashley and despite their dissatisfaction at last season, there's still, I would guess, a good 40% of them still willing to shell out the money to buy the new shirt. And that's probably replicated at every club in the country, isn't it?
Yes. We do see a boom in sales in legacy shirts or whatever people want to call them these days. But you do feel that slight degree of extra affinity, again, if you've got the financial resources and if you're into football shirts, sort of buying this season's, because again, in no other way, in no other industry that I'm familiar with, you feel that you are helping the club, and it's the club that you love, not Mike Ashley, not the Glazers, not John Henry. It's because you were born a Geordie, you were born with St James's Park as part of your upbringing. And it's and whatever beef you've got with Mike Ashley, you still want to see Newcastle do well in the Premier League this season. So it's a real challenge, I think, for some fans. But when I go to Sainsbury's, I don't say I'm going to go and buy an extra packet of biscuits this week because I want to help Sainsbury's finances. But we do that in terms of football clubs.
Yeah, or you can go to Tesco's and get a new carrier bag, which is a lot cheaper than a Brighton kit. I'll just let that sink in, because I knew you'd get it eventually, Kieran. Dave Bloom says, very simply, is it possible to give us a history of the finances behind VAR and who receives the money for it?
Right. VAR was developed by a company called Hawkeye. I think we originally associate Hawkeye with tennis.
Yep.
And they have patented the technology involved, so that they will receive a fee. Now, in terms of costs per match, I went into Companies House and I looked at both the accounts of the Football Association Premier League Limited and the Professional Game Match Officials Limited accounts this morning, just to see if I could find out anything specific in relation to this, and I couldn't. But I did some further digging round, and if you are in an FA Cup match, which is governed by VAR, and that tends to be just for when clubs are playing at Premier League grounds, when the Premier League club is the home team, it works out as £9,250 per match. So if you extend that over all 380 Premier League games, it works out as a total cost of just over 3.5 million, which is paid to both presumably the additional match officials who are at Stockley Park, and also for the people providing the technology. So that appears to be the broad cost. Could be a wee bit higher if the FA are doing it at a discount, but I can't see them doing that myself.
This is a question, Kieran. I think a lot of the referees and lines people, assistant referees, who listen to this pod will probably be able to answer. And I know some of them listen anonymously. They don't listen anonymously. They know who they are, but they don't tell us who they are. But Lee Mason became the first full-time VAR official this weekend, essentially. I'm wondering whether he'll still get paid as much as the referees who run the actual pitch, because certainly he won't have to be as fit as other referees. It just occurred to me to ask that question. So I will put that out there to people to see if we can find out, purely out of pure interest, because I'll never be fit enough to run around refereeing a game. But I still probably got a couple of years that I can blag my way into Stockley Park, put a green tracksuit on, relegate Brighton with a broad line.
Well, it looks like somebody tried it on yesterday. I thought it was you in the box.
It's strange. It's been... I like this idea of a broader line in which people still look a yard offside, but somewhere aren't anymore. But yeah, I'm enjoying it. Well, it went a bit pear-shaped with the West Ham penalty today, but that's something for Graham Souness to get worried about. I'm not that fussed. Michael Hartley has a question about transfers, especially transfers with an option to buy back. Who, says Michael, does this benefit more, the selling club or the buying club?
I think this is a really well-timed question from Michael because Tammy Abraham is presently, as we speak, in Rome, about to sign for Roma on a deal worth somewhere in the region of £40 million. But it would appear that Chelsea have the option to buy him back in 2 years' time for, I think it's twice the amount that they sold him for.
Wow.
Now, as far as I'm concerned, the beneficiary here is always the selling club, because if Tammy Abraham rips up Syria, if it's a storming season or two, we've seen just how much it has cost Chelsea to repurchase, in effect, Romelu Lukaku, a player who they sold for 25 million to Everton, and they're buying him back at the age of 28. So he won't have any resale value realistically, one would anticipate, unless he has a poor couple of seasons and that they decide to move him on. So he cost 98 million to buy back. So they there had all the upside risk. The advantage of a buyback option is that it's an option. So if Tammy Abraham is absolutely fantastic and his market value is 110 million, Chelsea can buy him back for 80. If Tammy Abraham has a poor couple of seasons, Chelsea probably wouldn't be interested in buying him, but also they would say, well, we will choose not to exercise our option. We will let him go elsewhere for perhaps another 40 million. So they are the major beneficiaries here. I know. My club Brighton, we bought Tariq Lamptey from Chelsea for I think $1.5 million.
Yeah,
and he had a sensational start to the season. He's been injured for a while, but again, there is talk about Chelsea having a buyback option because there was instantly a lot of interest in him moving on from our club, because we are a development club. We know where we are in the pecking order, so it's always to the benefit of the selling club, because an option is not the same as an obligation to buy back.
You can say it's a well-timed question, Kieran. Chances are Michael asked it in 2019. Will Block. Now, a lot of people picked up on what you had to say about this, Kieran. Will Block's the one we've chosen. Will Block says, in a recent pod, you said that hosting a World Cup or Olympics is a poison chalice to a country in the long run. Will says he had the good fortune to be at 2 World Cups, Germany and South Africa, and asked, would it be right to suggest that for an established football nation with an existing infrastructure, stadium travel, etc., like Germany, hosting a tournament wouldn't be a financial disaster as it could be for South Africa, who are pretty much starting the infrastructure from scratch?
Will's exactly right there. I had the privilege of attending both of those World Cups as well, and some of the best experiences of my life as far as I'm concerned. But Will's exactly right. The transport infrastructure, the hotels are already there, and the stadiums were there already. So therefore, they didn't have to have this huge capital expenditure investment. Whereas with South Africa, with Brazil as well, because in Brazil they built a couple of new stadiums effectively in the middle of nowhere in relatively small towns or cities, and then now matches are taking place, and even in a non-COVID environment, to effectively 3/4 empty stadium, because that's the level of interest in the local team. The same with Russia. Russia's slightly different because it's a mafioso state, and there's a lot of strange money going around in terms of construction projects, and I can say that without fear of any comeback from Russia, because we've got the example of the Sochi Olympics, which were one of the most scandalous overspends of all time.
Yeah. And let's be fair, Kieran, you're at the coalface, possibly laundering some of that money yourself. Who knows?
I was certainly involved in. Well, no, I won't even say that.
Probably the best. Yeah, especially when you think about the country we're going to for our next question. I think we should probably keep as discreet as possible.
I think you've got to look at the start point. What is the return that the country is going to get? We have the 22 FIFA World Cup taking place in Qatar, where the infrastructure cost is ridiculously large. I mean, I've been across to Qatar to give a few courses, and I've looked around the outskirts of a couple of the grounds, and the construction there is phenomenal for a country which is, let's be honest, relatively small, to such an extent that they've already committed to sell 2 of the stadium. I think it's to Morocco and Egypt afterwards, because they are being built literally in the same way as a Lego model. So they can be dismantled immediately following the tournament's end. But from Qatar's perspective, they feel that the public relations benefit will outweigh the financial cost. So that's a separate issue. I've read many of the management consultant documents that are put forward to promote a World Cup bid, and in my experience, they vastly overstate the benefits and understate the costs of hosting a tournament.
Rod Gray says, at the start of the first lockdown in March 2020, when all the other European leagues were shutting down, the Belarus top flight took the interesting decision to play on, or possibly were told to play on by their government. Who knows? Rod says, I even watched a couple of games in my desperation for live football. Having taken this approach, is Belarusian football now in a comparatively healthier financial situation than other European leagues of a similar size?
It is, in the sense that if we take a country the size of Belarus, the domestic TV deal is very, very modest indeed. So therefore, clubs in Belarus are more dependent upon the other 2 arms of football revenues, which are match day and commercial. To give you a sort of an indication, I went into UEFA's documentation, and I looked up the distributions to FC Bate, which stands for, apparently the Bate stands for the Borisov Automobile and Tractor Electronics Factory, and nothing says to me Soviet Russia or Soviet hangover than something like that. I think we've had this discussion before, that in UEFA there's various pools of money, one of which is called the market pool, and the money that you get out of the market pool is linked to the amount that your broadcaster pays for the UEFA Champions League and Europa League rights and so on. Chelsea made, this is the figures we got for 2019, Chelsea made 22 million from the market pool, and FC Bate made 48,000. So that gives you an extent. Chelsea are effectively, or rather BT are paying 50 times more for the TV rights than the Belarusian TV authorities. So it is very skewed towards match day income, and that's why the new European tournaments, the Europa Conference League, could actually be quite significant for countries of a similar size of Belarusia, because now they will be getting money, those clubs that qualify and make progress, which will be substantially more than they've earned in the past.
Our penultimate question, remember we still have that really interesting, if slightly complicated interview to come about cryptocurrency. It comes from Jack Painter. And Jack says, with the discussion on EFL salary caps, would a fairer way be a rule that clubs can only increase their wage spending by a certain percentage each year, maybe even in line with inflation? Or is that a rubbish idea? Welcome to my world, Jack, because the look on Kieran's face every time I ask him a question makes me think, oh, I've asked a rubbish one. This is a rubbish. So it's very difficult to read Kieran's face, Kieran. I heard him turning a few pages over while I was asking that question, so it could be that he was heading towards his "this is a rubbish idea" page for his list of admonishments. I don't know. Or it could be that Finley's getting even more clever than usual, and he's turning the spreadsheets over like somebody does for a conductor in an orchestra.
Well, first of all, as far to say to Jack, I'm a teacher. I always say to every one of my students, there is no such thing as a rubbish question, apart from the ones that you never ask, because if you never ask, you never learn. So, as an educator, Jack, you keep asking the question. But I do actually think that there is. I think this is an intriguing question, and it certainly has some merit. If we were to have a salary cap, perhaps it could be something, from what he's suggesting, similar to what we have with the triple lock in UK pensions, whereby the pay rise will be the higher of increases in wages, increases in inflation, or 2.5%. It's the higher of those three, and that's actually something which the government commits to quite often, and is hugely expensive from an exchequer point of view. So that is a route which could go down. My slight reservations are as follows. What happens when clubs are promoted and relegated? Because they automatically get an uptick or a reduction in the amount of broadcast revenues that they receive. We've seen Norwich, Brentford, and Watford. They're going from, even with the receipt of parachute payments, they're getting £60 million minimum. In the case of Brentford, they're going to get at least 90. Realistically, probably somewhere in the region of 110 and extra 120 million pounds. So link it to have them have salary caps linked to inflation, I think would be harsh, because it would increase the chances of an immediate relegation. My other slight reservation, and this is something which we have discussed on looking at all of the different types of financial fair play rules that are being put forwards, is financial fair play to a large extent locks in the existing gaps between clubs and prevents new people coming into the industry who want to invest, who want to take clubs to the next tier. And if you were to say that, if we take a club such as Everton, who's got a wage bill of, say, 160, 170 million pounds, they want to break into the top four, where the wages are, a minimum of 270. Well, that's quite painful, because the only way you get into the top four is if you pay the wages to recruit the players, and it is an expensive and quite painful task. But we've seen Chelsea do it, we've seen Manchester City do it. Financial fair play, it's never been explicitly stated that this is one of the reasons behind it, but implicitly it was to stop another Manchester City or Chelsea breaking into the elite clubs who feel that that they should have the European places by right, rather than by winning matches. And so that would be my slight reservation, but it's not a daft question at all.
Steve Catamol has our final question. And I have to say, Kieran, this shook me a little bit. Steve Catamol says, news of a reformed Champions League in 2024 caused a lot of fan frustration. What seems to have gone under the radar, though, are Juventus chief Andrea Agnelli's comments about a reform of the transfer market to a double path system, where clubs qualifying for specific tiers of international competition won't be allowed to buy each other's players. In other words, the Champions League sides can poach the best players from the Europa League and downwards, secure in the knowledge that their own players can't be bought by competitors. Any thoughts from you two would be appreciated. Well, if this is right, Kieran, it certainly went under my radar, and my thoughts, quite simply, are it's wrong.
It's wrong if you're a football player. If you are a football club owner who wants to make more money, it's wonderful. And indeed, if you took a look at when the detail of Super League came out, this was written in stone. This was. And there were huge advantages from the perspective of the clubs, because let's say that you've got a player who has, he's come through, he's 21, 22, he's just signed a decent contract, and he signed a decent 4-year contract, and let's say he's on 60 grand a week. He's locked into that club for the next 4 years, and he could be knocking in 30 goals a season. He could be running rings round defences in the Champions League or in the Super League or whatever it's going to be, in the knowledge that after 2 years he can't say, look, Juventus are willing to pay me 150 grand a week. So that means that his existing club doesn't have to give him more money. So there are certainly benefits to the elite clubs of having such an approach, because it would keep wage inflation down. Now, there's a case for saying that's a good thing, as far as the likes of billionaire Andrea Agnelli are concerned. But there's some other issues which show that, like most things to do with A, Super League, and B, Agnelli, it's not necessarily been properly thought through. Because from an EU perspective, isn't that a form of slavery that you cannot move to another one of the elite clubs in Europe? If Barcelona University come in and try to sign me up and offer me a load of money, well, I'd take it. If the German version of Have I Got News for You come in for you and say, Kevin, we'd like you to come and write our shows for us, you'd feel that, well, surely I'd be allowed to do the same. So it does appear to be dealing with issues of freedom of labour, which could result in a court case, and that could cause problems. The other issue is what happens if a player falls out of favour with the manager. And this happens all the time. We saw it with Dele Alli and Mourinho. Well, if Mourinho was still the manager of Spurs, Dele Alli would have moved somewhere this summer. But if he wasn't allowed to, because let's say that Spurs were playing in the Super League, he'd be effectively twiddling his thumbs with the kids for the next 2 or 3 years, having to train with the academy team or whatever other sort of petty punishments you get at football clubs. And also the club wouldn't be able to benefit because he's too good to go to a Europa League club in all probability. And there would be other clubs within Europe who would want to sign him who couldn't. So I don't think it's been thought through, but Steve's, it was a good spot, Steve. And it is something which concerned me at the time. I had a long list of things which I felt were wrong with Super League, from in terms of concentration of power and money in the hands of few. I'm not a fan of trickle down economics, and I think I've stated this on more than one occasion. And this was just another one of them.
Recently, Kieran, we've been getting an increasing number of questions containing words like Bitcoin, stablecoin, and fan token. And to be honest, Kieran, you and I are both still coming to terms with decimal. So we thought we'd have a quick word with cryptocurrency expert Gavin Brown. I say we. It was considered by all three of us. It was far too technical for my pay grade. So Kieran spoke to him.
Gavin, welcome to the show. How are you keeping?
Yeah, really good. Thanks, Kieran. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You're more than welcome. The reason why we asked you to come on the show is that we've had a few enquiries come through social media with regards to the developments in football in the last year or two, in particular relating to cryptocurrency, fan tokens, things like that. So, for the man in the pub, for the likes of myself and Kevin, could you explain to us what a cryptocurrency is?
Yeah, sure. So I guess in very basic terms, when most people hear the word cryptocurrency, they tend to think Bitcoin, right? That's certainly the most popular one. So cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin are what's known as a decentralized currency. And all that means is that rather than a single company or country or person controlling the money, it just means that a community controls the money. So if we were to think about the Great British Pound, which is the currency that we use, that is controlled and managed by the Bank of England, the central bank, as well as sort of influence from the monetary policy from governments. Whereas when we look at something like Bitcoin, it's not, we can't really, it doesn't have a head office, doesn't have a headquarters or directors or a central bank. It's a community driven project. So very different in terms of how it operates and how it's structured.
Okay, and can you have confidence in it if nobody's in charge? Because I think I've got a job and my boss tells me what to do, and if I've got £5 in my pocket, I know what I can buy with it. Is that the same with a cryptocurrency? Because I see the value of it going up and down all the time, and I'm thinking, well, should I get involved or shouldn't I not? Is it a pyramid scheme or is it genuine?
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, there are some cryptocurrencies out there that either are pyramid schemes and have been in the past, and much of that is born from the idea that it's largely an unregulated space, and with anything that's unregulated, you're always going to get your kind of bad actors in there as well. But for the likes of something, let's say like Bitcoin, if we start with that as an initial conversation, that certainly isn't. That operates using a system called a blockchain. And a blockchain is really the ability, it's a type of database, really. So it's a way of recording how much money different people have got and who's sending money to whom. And, normally you and I would do that between each other, probably me sending money to you, no doubt, through the traditional banking system, HSBC to Santander or to NatWest or wherever else it might be. And that's all controlled by those banks, those central authorities. All that happens with Bitcoin is we're still moving money electronically, but we just do it by using a community-driven project or community verification. So rather than a single bank checking that transactions are true and checking that things are as they say they are, instead it's a community who are all able to work together to maintain the rigor of the system. It's all done in quite a complicated way in terms of different incentive structures, but broadly speaking, that's what it is. It's a community-run bank, really.
Okay, cool. Because I've seen that for this season, Watford have a new shirt sponsor, and the sponsor has paid them in a cryptocurrency. So what can Watford do with that? Because my fear is if somebody says, "Okay, I'm going to pay you 3 Bitcoin for something," I say, "Fine." But I can't go down to Waitrose because I live in Sussex and I'm posh, and I can't pay the window cleaner in cryptocurrency. So am I restricted or are Watford restricted as to what they can then do? Because they go out and go and sign a centre forward and say let's say that they're buying them from Aberdeen or from Crewe or from Milan or Barcelona. Can they buy the player in cryptocurrency, or do they have to sort of a bit like what I do when I go on my holidays? Do I have to go to the equivalent of Marks and Spencer's finance house and say, well, can you go and exchange this for pounds?
I just like the fact you mentioned Crewe in the same sentence as Madrid and Barcelona perfectly.
They're always, as an Alex fan, I know you'd like that.
Yeah, so there's a few choices from the position of the football club. So the first choice is that they can obviously turn that money instantly if they wanted to into pound sterling. So, like any market, cryptocurrency markets, there are a constant price available. There's typically supply and demand. So if you're ever given cryptocurrency as a payment for a player or something else for that matter, if you're nervous about holding it, nervous about the price going up and down rapidly, first thing we can do is go and sell it and turn it into pound sterling and remove that volatility, remove that risk. And the club may already have done that for all we know. The second thing they could do if they wanted to, they could feel confident in the actual currency itself and they might hold it. They might actually put it on their balance sheet. They could hold that money with a view to doing something else in future, maybe turning it into pound sterling at some point in the future, and or trying to spend it in whatever way they are able to. Obviously, with that, there's a risk. If the price starts to fall, this is a club and a company that I imagine, they report their profits in pounds, not in cryptocurrency. So if it does start to devalue over time, that's going to hurt their kind of profit for that particular period. But equally, it could go up in value, and that would be, a speculative gain, and who knows what might happen with that. The final point to note is, though, like any consideration, when you're buying and selling things, you can buy and sell subject to legal restrictions and regulatory restrictions. You can buy and sell using different types of money, different currencies. So if it was possible that both counterparties, let's say buying and selling a player, agreed that cryptocurrency was the, appropriate as a valuation mechanism and the transfer of value, then they could go ahead and do that. Obviously, though, it would need to be subject to any local rules around regulation or even any legal rules in that particular jurisdiction as well. So lots of things to think about, but, a few options for the club, I would say.
Yeah, because my immediate thought is, if I was trying to work out financial fair play, have we complied or not complied, and UEFA do that in euro, and clearly here in both the EFL and the Premier League, we do it in pound sterling. Would that be able to operate if we're using crypto as well, or do you just go and take the exchange rate for crypto at the end of the year and say, well, we'll just translate it like we would translate dollars into pounds, and there you go?
Yeah, I think certainly the latter. So, that's what we kind of know as, mark to market, that idea of, what's it worth as at the year end or when you're drafting the accounts. You'd change it, from Bitcoin value into pound sterling or dollars or whatever your functional, your currency was that you prepared your accounts in. The only thing I would say is that I'm not sure what the financial fair play rules are on this, but the downside with it from doing that is obviously it's an incredibly volatile asset. So it might be the case, and I know if I was writing those rules about financial fair play, thinking about cryptocurrencies and how we would treat them, they might want to apply some kind of reduction. So you might say, okay, we've got this club has got this much Bitcoin, it's worth this much in pounds sterling, but maybe we're then going to temper that by reducing it, applying a haircut, maybe something like 25% or 50%. I mean, this is what happens in banks all the time, this idea of risk-weighted assets. Okay, so there might be some kind of reduction there in lieu of the fact that, yes, it's worth this much at year end, but who knows what's going to happen going forward. It's not as stable as traditional currency, maybe.
Okay, fair enough. Okay. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I feel my brain has expanded in the last 5 minutes. So I really appreciate this. The other issue which has sort of really come to our attention is the idea of fan tokens, which are being linked in this sort of new type of money that old men like me don't understand. So we've seen Socios arise. They are now the front of shirt sponsor for Inter, which for an old school fan like me that's grown up with Inter is Pirelli, and Pirelli is Inter as far as I'm concerned. But we've got a new sponsor there, and that's going to be a lot of money for a prime European club. So they clearly have got a lot of money behind them. They're also involved with Leeds United. We've seen Rangers Football Club. They've got an involvement, and we are seeing more and more clubs across the whole of Europe now start to get involved with this idea of fan tokens. How did they operate? Are they connected directly to these cryptocurrencies? Can their values go up or down, or do you think that's independent?
Yeah, it's certainly there is certainly a connection there. Perhaps the most obvious connection is the technology which sits underneath them. So normally, the technology would be blockchain, which, as I mentioned before, it's just a type of database, basically. So it's likely that most tokens, currencies, cryptocurrencies in that regard are normally supported by a blockchain type system. And blockchain is really good at dealing with digital identities. Okay, so verification of things, so proving that when someone says yes, I own this asset, then it's a really efficient manner of reconciling who owns what and at what point in time. Now, the reason that might be quite interesting for a sort of a fan-based token is that obviously from the club's perspective, it's pure money coming into the club straight away, isn't it?
Yeah.
And therefore, not just the shirt sponsorship coming in, but any, if you run a football club and you suddenly decide that you're going to start to issue a token, what that allows you to do, for better or for worse, is effectively to monetize fan engagement. Now, obviously, if you're part of a supporters trust or similar, that monetization, you might interpret that as exploitation, especially a sport which arguably is much more expensive now than it once was a generation or so back, by comparative purposes. But from the perspective of the club, they might see it as actually the ability to widen engagement for people who wish to do more with the club in terms of interaction. They can certainly have more opportunities, and especially when you're thinking about that global audience. The idea we can now reach out to that global audience more readily, because it's not just a case of coming on the day and buying your program, and that's all you've got to show that you actually went to watch a game. Maybe there are going to be these tokens wrapped up in experiences on match day, which make the whole thing, although slightly more expensive perhaps, but certainly make it more immersive, more interactive, and also you've got more to show for it, although those assets post-match day might actually be digital assets of sort of certifications to prove that you were present on a particular day for a particular match.
Yeah, I can see the logic to that, because I've always argued that Manchester United constantly say in their press releases that they have 1.1 billion fans around the world, but they only generate £600 million of revenue. So for Manchester United to make 60 pence of revenue per fan per year is actually a pretty poor return. So I can see the benefit in something like this, because it's not just the 76,000 who are turning up at Old Trafford on every fortnight. Now for every home match, presumably you can have a digital program which you can buy using your tokens, or you can vote for man of the match. So I can certainly see the benefits from the club's point of view. Presumably the likes of Socios, they'll take a commission on this, so they'll make money. The other party involved is the fan. Is the fan getting something genuine in terms of engagement, or is it ultimately a marketing ploy to extract more money from punters?
Yeah, in my opinion, I think it's probably both. I mean, it will depend on the way the different schemes are structured. It may be that clubs decide to take a view where they're looking not necessarily to extract or sort of monetize that engagement, but instead are looking more to give that engagement back. I mean, there'd be nothing stopping a particular club bringing in a fan token and saying that they will make zero remuneration from this and that it's purely for engagement purposes. Obviously, there might be a very small cost then just to cover the cost of the system itself, but you could easily imagine a club could take that view, or they could take the $500,000 or $1 million plus every year, which is going to come with having that scheme, which I guess we probably know the answer to that, given the kind of for-profit mentality of many clubs today. The other problem, I guess, we've got to sort of compare and contrast with this is this idea of who has access to these tokens. Now, I know we were talking about the Leeds before as a football club with their fan token, and they've got a load of concerns that they've mentioned, and I think I've got a lot of sympathy with many of these. So the first one is that idea of football only being for the wealthy. So we're already in a situation where many kind of parts of our society can't actually afford to go, certainly not to games regularly, and maybe even at all. But the idea that the experience may become even more expensive has two parts. A, it starts to crowd out the ability of football to be the working person's game, men, women, and children from all parts of society. But I guess the other thing is, and you mentioned there, the idea of voting. So this notion that these fan tokens can be used for voting, it might be player of the season votes, it might be person of the match votes, maybe even at its most extreme, you could make, and people have even written about this, the idea of real-time voting whilst the game is happening in order to maybe affect decisions or substitutions or tactics. You could take this as far as you wanted it, and I certainly don't think it would ever go that far, but it certainly could do if you wanted it to. But I guess the problem with that is that for a family or a person who's more wealthy and therefore able to engage in this sort of scheme and pay the fee to do so, they're going to have more influence over their club. And therefore, they're going to have better engagement with their club, and they're going to have more say when it comes to that club. Now, whether those decisions are inconsequential decisions or really important material decisions, the divide there between the haves and the have-nots within the kind of club community, in my view, can only really widen with a scheme like this, unless it's run as a kind of zero cost, you're giving back to the fans sort of policy rather than an extraction of money.
Fair enough. But from what you're saying, I can certainly see, given that the clubs in the Premier League have lost, based on my figures, around about 1.2 billion in 2020, and that's going to amplify in 2021. the championship is a license to lose money even in a good year. If I was a marketing director, a commercial director, a financial director of a club, I'd be saying to myself, well, it's free money coming in. We can do something on the engagement side. We're not going to rip off the fans, but every single additional source of revenue for the club we're now desperate for, and therefore we go for it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think it certainly is fair, and maybe a lot of fans and a lot of season ticket holders might say, well, it's not something for me, but if other people want to get involved and that gives us more budget for the youth system or more budget to put towards an additional player, then so be it. It's a welcome addition, and obviously some people will take that view. I guess it depends, what your personal position is in terms of philosophy of football and finance mixing together, as well as the fortunes of yourself personally and that of your club. There's many clubs where a sort of 10,000, 100,000 of extra revenue a year might be the difference between survival and not survival. So it might be a very small price to pay to keep your team in the game, so to speak. I guess that it's just important to recognise that there is, there are these kind of spin-off caveats to sort of contextualise it. I mean, one of the things that has been raised with some of the fan tokens is, what if your tokens are available for sale as part of what's known as an FTO? It's a fan token offering, and other supporters could come and buy your tokens. Now, we saw last year, during COVID, plenty of FA Cup fixtures where we saw opposing fans actually purchasing shirts and doing things to try and help support the finances of lower clubs, which was a great effort, But we could easily see with this scenario, those kind of rival teams, you're a Brighton fan, so if you want, I know you're not particularly, is it Crystal Palace, normally your nemesis team?
A small club called Crystal Palace, yes. Yes.
Give them their full title. But it could be that, if they did a fan token offering, you could go and purchase a whole load of tokens at Crystal Palace, if it's permissible, and then have significant influence over their judgment, for their, player of the match or player of the season, whoever it might be. And you could deliberately distort those results just because you want to interfere with the club. So, there is that kind of, I don't think that would necessarily be a big component of it, but it is there's a definite trade-off to think about there in terms of who has a say and what those particular decisions might be. I think as a final point, you raise that idea of, additional revenue. There's other things that can be done here. So you might have heard of there's a particular type of token called an NFT.
Yeah.
It stands for non-fungible token, but without being too techy, it gives you the digital claim, albeit not legal rights, to a piece of music or a video clip or whatever it might be. And there's a lot of discussion at the moment about effectively embedding or putting NFTs inside physical things, be they pieces of artwork or clothing. So imagine you went to purchase your Brighton top for the season, the brand new kit. And as part of that kit, there was an NFT built into it where you had the ownership, let's say, for 5 minutes of football in Game 7 of that particular season. If something significant happens in that particular moment during those 5 minutes of football, your shirt would be the only shirt in the world that was a Brighton shirt, official for that season, with a sort of digital claim over that particular passage of football. So you can imagine many years on, if you're a Manchester United fan, when Cantona did the collar up and he just flicked the ball into the top left-hand corner and looked around Old Trafford, imagine how much that particular fan shirt might be worth if it had that digital token inside of it. So there's lots of ways clubs could kind of continue to monetize using these ideas of tokens, not just as a fan token, but also as tokens inside clothing as well, to name but a few.
That's absolutely brilliant, because Brighton could very easily become the XG champions of Europe with our inability to actually score goals, but the ability to create them. And I could celebrate that particular moment. You've actually, I think you've converted me here, Gav. So I really appreciate it. I'd just like to say thank you so much for giving us your insight. If people want to find you on social media, because you are Mr. Crypto, in fact, Professor Crypto, as far as I'm concerned, because I read all of your stuff, where can people find you in the wonderful world of social media?
Yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's probably the place where I do most of my writing. So if you just search for Gavin Brown there and search for University of Liverpool, although do make sure there are 2 Gavin Browns at my university. So make sure it's a picture of me on the profile and just request to connect there. Or alternatively, I'm on Twitter as well. You can follow me at GavinB_finance. So feel free to reach out on Twitter as well.
Thanks so much, Gav. Good luck to the Alex, and send my best to David Artell. He's a very good friend of the show, as well as being an absolutely top bloke as well.
Oh, cheers, Kieran. Take care. Thanks ever so much.
Kieran, off the back of that interview, I just want to read out some of Gavin's credentials even. I could read his credentials, but I'd have to explain what they were first, and that's, people listening to this are not interested in credentials. His credentials are he's the fintech lead at the University of Liverpool, focusing research on payment technology, specifically cryptocurrency, stable coin pricing, the future of money. He's one of the world's leading experts on cryptocurrency. And basically what he says goes, and essentially what he says is the genie's out of the bottle here, Kieran. We're not going backwards on this one. We're all going to have to get used to a different way of paying for things at our football club, aren't we?
Well, I think it's not a different way. I think there'll be more than one way of paying things. So we can still pay for things, using your debit card, using sterling, but crypto is a gamble. It's a bit like it's a bit like agreeing to pay for things in euros or dollars, because the exchange rate moves all the time. You're never quite sure how much it's going to cost you in terms of our money. And certainly in relation to Gavin, I've known Gavin for quite a few years, because we were at university teaching together in both Manchester and Liverpool. And I'm not blowing smoke up the guy's backside here. He is the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. And I remember when he first came to the university, and I was part of the interview panel, and I was just absolutely blown away. I mean, the guy is sort of one of those people, when you're playing chess, has already checkmated you when I'm just putting out the pieces. He's phenomenally clever, and he's got a real understanding, but also an ability to communicate this in a way which the likes of we can understand.
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm sulking now, Kieran, because you said he's the cleverest person you've ever met, but if he's checkmated you while you're putting the pieces out, that's called cheating, Kieran. That's nothing to do with being clever. That's because I'd quite like to meet Gavin Brown, because he's written a book called Spending Without Thinking, which is just like, I'd love to know why he didn't come to me for his research on that. He would have had a whole chapter, Spending Without Thinking. Somebody's written a book about it. I need to buy that. And I told Ellie that. Ellie said the last thing you need is a textbook. Talking of spending without thinking, folks, he said in a seamless link, if you'd like to make a small weekly contribution to our always free-to-air podcast, then please do so by going to patreon.com/price of football. That would be very kind of you. And if you have any questions for our future questions pods, it's questions@priceoffootball.com. And as ever, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire to say goodbye.
Thanks, Kevin.
I wanted to do a fake ending just to prove I'm not the cleverest person you've ever met. Basically, your friend Gavin, he would have done that seamlessly. Gavin would have done it he would have done it in Greek. He would have done it in Greek while juggling.
Thank you again, folks, for the feedback. And as Kevin says, for Patreon, first of all, we're never going to be charging for the show. If you want to give a donation, can be as low as £1 a month. We're grateful, but other than that, just be nice to us, and we'll try to be nice to people as well. So, in terms of how you can help the show in a non-financial manner, just click on that follow button with the big purple icon. And I remember I live in a non-purple world, being colourblind. But if you can give us 5 stars and then just write whatever you want in terms of what you think of the show. Lots of people are coming up with some really funny stuff, which that keeps us entertained as well. And other than that, thanks very much for your support, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, I'm amazed Gavin hasn't come up with a cure for colour blindness. All I'm saying is, Kieran, why don't you marry Gavin? Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The Price of Football. Price of football.